Welcome to the show. Did anybody watch a Goob on Instagram? Goob, you too?
What? Mm-mm.
So every single time he
What?
starts off,
What?
he goes, "Welcome to the show." Person who is going to fuck up is kind of
What?
like what he does. So I always find that entertaining. So,
Person that's
welcome
gonna
to the
fuck up?
show,
What?
Nutrition and Fitness
What?
Myths
What? What?
edition.
I don't know what just happened.
No, that's all right.
I'm gonna have to
Goob.
see this thing.
We're trying new things today. We're
Listening to
trying new
this.
things.
I mean, I think that that's such a great segue into the things that people have tried for a very long time that are myths that exist in the health industry from a fitness and nutrition perspective. So, what better way to jump in other than trying new things with fitness? What questions do we have lined up today, Brandon?
Oh yeah, going over the myths. I think one of my favorite myths I talk to people about are about carbs and that carbs make you fat. Ah, well, we could dive into that, but I was told by Steve we got a time limit, so we'll dive right into this real quick. So basically, carbs are not going to make you fat, dependent though on every individual. So I'm not saying if you are already overweight, have diabetes, if you are obese, you're going to keep eating keep eating carbs and you won't gain fat. But if you are an active individual, it is something that you shouldn't be afraid of, especially if you do any type of intense cardio in general, working out, powerlifting, CrossFit. I worked for a hockey team, and even the players, it's interesting how far this myth has really gone, even to the professional level. During their preseason work, they would they'd be finishing up a hour-long strength training workout, maybe have anywhere between 10, 15, 30 minutes, it's up to an hour sometimes, before they had to go to the ice and do some ice skating practice for their cardio piece. And they were like, I don't know what I should eat. And I was just like, here, take all the carbs you can get. This is a nice little treat here. I know you like Rice Krispies. Everyone likes Rice Krispies. Take this, just because we needed them to get carbs in their system to be able to replenish the energy that essentially they lost from that workout in order to have a pretty decent workout on the ice. So it's interesting to see how far this myth has come from just your average gym goer to even to the professional level, that there is still some of that myth floating around out there. But yeah, carbs aren't bad, but again, it is very individualized. So before you go off and start eating a bowl of Fruity Pebbles because carbs aren't bad, quote unquote, for you, just it's all independent on what your daily activity level is. Like anything, it's gonna vary from person to person, and that is but overall, as a blanket statement, myth is of carbs make you fat. It's not true. It's not true.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely well supported in, sports performance nutrition that the more intense your activity level is, the more carbohydrate you'll probably need to thrive and see those training adaptations. And if you don't want to actually see progress, then you probably should not eat carbs. Again, if you are considered a high intensity, even a lifestyle, sometimes when people are pretty stressed out, sometimes that carbohydrate can actually help decrease some of that stress. So when we take this blanket statement of carbohydrates are bad, it is a simple tool that we want to consider the use case for. When is it appropriate? When is it not appropriate? If you sit on your butt all day, and you're not doing, strength training more than, I would say probably 3 times a week would be the minimum to start to manipulate some carbohydrate intake, then that's where you definitely want to just be a little more conscious when you are consuming these meals. And I think that when people say carbohydrates are bad, the general plate, if you take an 8-inch plate, should be divided into thirds. And I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb versus alienating a food group completely. It seems like most average people, again, not athletes, not people with chronic illnesses or health conditions, but if you take a third of your plate and you use and kind of cover it with a protein source, some kind of, beef, chicken, fish, you take a third of it, cover it with some vegetables, and you take a third of it and cover it with some starches, whether that's rice, potatoes, something like that. And then you drizzle some, some fat sources like an olive oil or something over the vegetables. I think that that's usually a pretty good balanced plate that would really help people make sure that they're incorporating enough of each macronutrient, and ultimately finding that balance. But I think that there's another myth too, in that as we segue into carbs are bad, and fat makes you fat, like Brandon, maybe you can explain to us a little bit around, does fat actually make you fat?
It's going to depend from person to person. Again, how much fat someone is taking. Now, the immediate answer I want to say is, yeah, if you are taking in an excess amount of fat in your daily, like I have a friend, she would dip 1 cane sauce per cane strip. And that sauce is pretty heavy on top of the Cane's chicken strip alone. So that alone, that's a lot of fat. But even though she might be getting about 80 grams of fat in one sitting, as long as the rest of her calories the rest of that day, she's not going to gain fat. Now, she may develop some sort of cardio or some with her cholesterol maybe go wonky if that's something that she does on a regular basis. But from the standpoint of just aesthetics, having fat, I mean, we look at keto. Keto got really popular, and I'm not advocating for keto by any means, but keto has been associated as one of the go-to popular fat loss diets over the last few years. So with that same argument, it's saying, hey, yeah, eating fat makes you fat, but also eating a ton of fat will also make you lose fat. So again, it's going to vary from person to person how much of their fat intake is. So theoretically, yeah, if they're eating a ton of fat, you're going to gain fat because you are now in a caloric surplus. But you can also eat a lot of fat, and if you're still in a caloric deficit, you're going to lose fat weight. So again, varies from person to person, individualized, but from black and white, eating fat does not make you fat.
I hear that there's more than anything out of that little snippet, that there's an ideal sauce to food ratio.
There
Steve,
is.
is there an ideal ratio, Steve?
Well, before we go to the ideal ratio of sauce and food, I'll just say from the client perspective that overeating anything, so carbs, proteins, fat specifically, right? Overeating it will yield a certain outcome. Undereating all of them will also yield a certain outcome. The interesting thing about fat was when I started to consume, I don't want to say more, but an appropriate amount of fat based upon what was recommended to me through a coach. All of a sudden my hormones and my strength and my mood and my physique, all of those things started to change in a direction that I wanted. So too much fat, too little fat, all of that, yeah, they're going to add up to something because of the idea of calories in, calories out. But understanding what fat actually does when it interacts with your body, hormones, vitamins, minerals, etc., is going to be the more important thing. And again, not the expert here, just a byproduct of doing and listening. In terms of sauce to food, the more sauce, the better. 100%. 100%.
Yeah. My girlfriend will literally refuse to consume any food unless she has like 4 different sauces on it. So it's always an interesting thing to watch her reach for a Chick-fil-A sauce on a random salmon meal. Salmon. I don't know why I just pronounced yellow and salmon, but yeah, I mean, it's wild. But, I think that you bring up a great point that when people are starting to demonize these individual nutrients, it's really important for people to keep in mind in that the majority of food has a function from the nutrient perspective, where we talk about macronutrients are going to determine how you look from a body composition perspective, I think is a really great way for people to simplify that. And micronutrients will determine and dictate how you feel. So vitamins and minerals, again, really important from a mood. Like we even find that certain things are implicated in things like depression and chronic mental illness. And we find that macronutrients like being deficient in carbohydrates, right? If you do a lot of high intensity boot camps, a lot of high intensity exercise, you're going to have a decrease in performance. And we know that the number one thing that is universally applicable is the amount of effort intensity you put into your training is going to determine how much you actually grow. So when we look at nutrition's role in that, I think it's really important to make sure that people understand that food provides a function. And while it's not just fuel, there are things that you just want to keep in the back of your mind of what do you need more of to support your day-to-day, your activities of daily living, so on and so forth. So I think that's a good segue into our next question, which is why people feel like they can't lose weight because their hormones. Is that a true piece of information or is that a myth? But when we think about like the true reason why people will gain or lose weight is purely because they are either in a caloric surplus or a deficit. And while their hormones might influence that threshold of where that might be, for instance, when people have a lower um, thyroid hormone, right, which is commonly implicated in weight gain, we actually find that a lot of the metabolic processes sure do slow down. Their basal metabolic rate might slow down by 5 to 10%. But by and large, it's the fatigue and lethargy that come as a byproduct of that inherently cause people to want to move less. So the interesting part about being in a caloric deficit, when people say, well, I'm in a deficit and I'm not losing weight, oftentimes we find that when people consume less energy, aka food, aka calories, which literally a calorie is exactly just a unit of energy that's derived from food, we get less energy, we're going to want to we're going to want to use less energy. And it's kind of like a bank account analogy. You're not going to want to spend what you don't have, and you can spend on credit or debt only to a certain degree. And so when I think that, and I think that, yes, to support your original assertion that it does matter, I don't think that it's the biggest determining factor of what it means to have the appropriate caloric deficit or weight loss. What is your perspective on that?
So because what you're saying, like if you're be more lethargic, there's the hormones play a factor in the output, but it not necessarily correlates like, oh, if your hormones are off. And so I think in my head, I would jump in ahead to all the effects of hormones. But no, yeah, I agree with you though, 100%.
Well, then what about eating late at night? Myth. Does that cause weight gain?
From a very superficial answer, I'm going to say yes, because if you, let's say, have a big fibrous meal, you might have a slower digestion at night and you wake up a little heavier the next morning. That's really it, though. From a fat gain side of things, though, no. Like sometimes, I think even in a previous episode, we talked about how I think me and Andrew, we both like eating later, quote unquote, relative at night because we like going to sleep with food in our stomach, opposed to some people. Maybe it was Steve. You like feeling a little hungry before going to bed. And I've actually been on both sides, but I do prefer to have that feeling of hunger not exist when going to sleep. It makes it a little easier for me personally. But from the sole conversation of fat, eating carbs, eating anything really after, I think the time was 6 o'clock in the past. It was always 6 o'clock, which I'm like, how do you know? What if I went back and forth between the East Coast and the West Coast? My body would never really adjust to that. It's a myth. It's a myth. You're not going, as long, again, if at the end of the day, you're still in a caloric deficit, if you're in a caloric surplus, whatever your goals may be, nothing magical is going to happen because you're eating at a certain time of day. Your body's still working at night when you're sleeping. And so it's not like, okay, well, you're here in a coma state. So even in a coma state, you're still burning calories. So it's a myth. It's a myth. Don't worry about it. Eat your ice cream at 9 p.m. if you want to. That's what I would do.
I would definitely agree that it's, it goes back to exactly what we just talked about with the hormones, and that the overarching theme in research right now suggests that when all calories are considered equal and someone's eating 2,000 calories, it doesn't matter if they eat 2,000 calories right before bed or if they eat, 400 or 500 calorie meals throughout the day. It's the overall amount of energy. And if you have more energy than what you need to burn and survive and kind of do your daily activities, then obviously the remainder of that is going to go into storage, the same way that if you have more money in your bank account after you pay all your bills, ideally some of that gets put into storage. Versus if you don't have enough, then obviously that's going to have to pull stuff out of storage, or which we call, kind of a very similar anecdote to fat loss, in that you're going to have to pull energy out of your stores, which is traditionally going to be, stored as that either those fat cells and or that muscle glycogen where you store blood sugar. So I think that that's definitely good for people to keep in mind, which brings us to our last myth here. Steve, we're going to throw this one over to you. Do you think that supplements are essential for fat loss?
Yes.
There you have it, folks. 15 minutes. 15 minutes.
No. So supplements, I think if we dissect it, they are supplemental too. So you can I would say, barring some type of condition or issue or something that you're dealing with, that is, call it outside of your control at this point in time, you should be able to get your micronutrients, your macronutrients, everything from whole foods for the most part. Supplements make it easier. Supplements make it maybe more palatable. Supplements maybe help you get further sooner in your day, whatever the thing might be. But if you need to hit your 35 grams of fiber and your 200 grams of protein and your 85 grams of fat and your 160 grams of carbs, and it's not a recommendation, it's random numbers right now, you should be able to do all of those pieces with whole food. And if you break down your macros and you're trying to get certain vitamins, certain just ultimate, call it nutrients across the board, then again, from food, a wide variety of food, that is going to, generally speaking, help you get there. Now, question is, do you need? The answer is no. Are there supplements that you could probably be taking? The answer is probably yes, based upon blood work and based upon knowing what your body needs. Going and finding your favorite guru's supplement kind of regimen and everything like that is not going to work for you, most likely. I'm sure it will work for 1 out of every 100 of you or some number, but it is not going to just transfer over and work for you. If they're having one thing, you may not need it. Maybe they have a deficiency you don't know about. Who knows? Maybe at the same point in time, it's going to put you way over what you're already getting because one of the foods you eat and you like to consume already has enough of that in there. So do your research, understand it. There's a couple of companies out there that'll do blood tests and help kind of pick out what your vitamins look like. If you need supplementation from a macro standpoint, protein, etc., fine, but make sure you're just not adding it for the sake of adding it.
I think that's well said. So those are your 5 top nutrition myths that we've stumbled across. If you guys have anything that you want us to answer on Beyond the Pumps podcast, please just email us, Steve at beyondthepump.com, Andrew at beyondthepump.com, Brandon at Beyond the Pump. We're happy to really take some time to delve into these things. Make sure you like and subscribe, as well as give us a 5-star review, because that stuff really does help us continue to make sure that we can get the right information in front of the right people. So if you did appreciate this, please support the podcast. We would love that. And if there's anything else we can ever do to support you guys in future episodes, we'll go ahead and move on to the end of the podcast here. So any concluding thoughts, fellas?
Nothing on my end. That's just the tip of the iceberg of 5 of them, and there's going to be a lot more to come. So shoot in those recommendations, and we'll be throwing out a bunch more myths that are out there floating around.
All right. Till next time.